Hey guys, and welcome back to History Revision Success, where we are looking at our America GCSE topic from 1920 to 1973. Now, we are today going to be looking at the topic of the Red Scare. Now, this happened particularly in context with the idea of the wave of immigration that took place. It's kind of coinciding in our understanding of the treatment of different groups of people in America in the 1920s. We've previously looked at African Americans. We've looked at the how people treated immigrants as they entered the country, and this is the way that a particular group of immigrants were treated. So the Red Scare, I guess, is an infamous era of American history. It's a time whereby a heightened and most likely very overplayed fear of communism, caused in part by the arrival of new immigrant groups to America, led the government to arrest 6,000 people across 33 cities. Now, take this image behind me, for example, which is a cartoon published in the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper, created during the Red Scare. Now, it shows kind of a dirty, potentially violent man holding a knife and flaming torch while sneaking under the American flag. The words red, Bolshevism, anarchy all appear in the picture, suggesting that, the hidden anarchist, communist spy is entering America to destroy it from within. Now, therefore, who are the Reds? Why has the cartoonist shown this man sneaking under the flag? And, what really was this Red Scare at the time? So let's find out. Now, as we already looked at in our immigration lesson, between 1820 and 1920, around 35 million immigrants came to live in America. At first, most of these were from Britain and Northern Europe, mostly Protestants. However, from the 1880s, a new wave of immigrant was arriving from Central and Eastern Europe, Japan, and China. Their culture and traditions were very, very different from previous immigrant groups. And as a result, the changing character of the new wave of immigrants was seen by many as a threat to the older and more established American way of life. The result was a series of new laws that restricted the number of immigrants allowed into the USA. Now, go and watch the video on immigration to find out about those laws if you need to recap. As well as viewing the foreigners with suspicion, some saw the immigrants as the enemy who brought un-American ideas into the country. Many were very, very fearful of these new ideas. In Russia, for example, a political group known as the Communists, also known as Reds, had overthrown and later killed their rulers in the Russian Revolution of October 1917. At first, this was led by a man called Vladimir Lenin, you can see behind me. Communists believed that all workers should join together, rebel against the country's ruling classes, and share all wealth equally among citizens. They were committed to the improvement of workers' rights, working conditions, and a number of strikes were organized by workers' trade unions. In a country so dedicated to business and enterprise as America, the idea of workers refusing to work was considered very un-American by many. America, the American dream, is very symptomatic of this idea of entrepreneurship. And so communism was really seen as a direct, huge threat to the American way of life. Now, the communists who now ran Russia was something the Americans feared could happen in America, especially as there were nearly 1.5 million Russians who had moved to America in the past years. An American Communist Party was set up in 1919, and there was a fear that its members might try to start a communist revolution similar to the one in Russia. Industrial unrest was increasing in the USA at this time, and when 100,000 members of the Boston police force went on strike, communists were blamed. Now, the fear of communism grew further when Alexander Mitchell Palmer, the man in charge of America's law and police, was the target of a terrorist attack. In July 1919, a bomb ripped out the front of his house, and found next to the limbs of the suicide bomber was a newspaper called Plain Words, a communist publication. Later that year, an unidentified bomber blew up 30 people in New York. No one was ever found guilty of this crime, but people's fear of communism increased even more. As well as communists, anarchists were another group greatly feared in the 1920s. Anarchists believe that countries should not be ruled by organized governments with set laws and rules by a system. They believe it should be voluntary cooperation, no borders, no government, everyone just kind of gets on with it themselves, and they have a belief it will all work. Now, many Americans felt that there was good reason to fear anarchists, and in 1901, an anarchist called Leon Franz Solzhenitsyn had actually shot dead US President William McKinley. So there was kind of a context, a pretext for this fear of anarchism. Now, kind of the last thing that happens was this event called the Palmer Raids. Now, after the attack on his home, Alexander Mitchell Palmer, remember the man in charge of America's law and police, who had a bomb attack on his own home, vowed to get rid of America's communists, or Reds. During the event, which we now call the Palmer Raids, around 6,000 suspected communists were arrested and put in prisons across 33 cities. The police were looking for evidence of an attempt by communists to take over government, but they found only 3 pistols and no explosives. Palmer announced that there were plans by communists to launch terror attacks, but the attacks never came. Soon after, the Red Scare was over, but it was clear that the American government and many Americans had a deep-seated fear of Reds, of communism. Indeed, the 1920s then saw a decline in trade union membership, as it fell from 6 million in 1920 to 3.6 million in 1923. So communism is being equated to the left. Trade unions are often, attended by those and supported particularly by left-wing parties, and therefore all of that is being kind of smothered. Now, this fear of communism is a very continual fear within America and in American society, and we will revisit this in the 1950s with McCarthyism, where we kind of have another surging moment of fear and hysteria about this. But this is the Red Scare in the 1920s.